Welcome back to In the Spotlight. Jeanne and Kathleen here. And on the phone, we have Mark Glennon. He is the CEO and founder of WirePoints. I encourage everybody to go to wirepoints.org, go to their website, and sign up for their daily emails because you are going to get a list of really important articles that surround both state, local, and national news. They shift through all the stuff for you and they put out the best stuff. But more importantly, you're going to get their original reports and they do their homework. Mark and his president, Ted Dabrowski, do their homework and they put out original reports on what's happening specifically in Illinois. And on top of it, they do their original research, put the data together as well. But we have Mark on the phone today, Kathleen, because he wrote in a remarkable piece called Term Limit Bill Dies in Illinois' Latest Hell No to Ethics Reform. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for that, Jeanne, and thank you for having me.
So, this bill or this article that you wrote speaks specifically about term limits, and it says, polls have long showed that few things in Illinois have been more bipartisan support than term limits, with 80% of voters in support. Springfield, however, will have none of it. A lot of hay was made, as Politico said this week, about the Illinois House passing term limits earlier this year, though the bill was only for the Speaker, Senate President, and minority leaders of both chambers. You're spot on. They did term limits for leaders and not term limits overall. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's significant because it shows the extent to which the establishment now really thinks they can get away with just not caring what voters think. I mean, you just don't see this kind of level of support on issues very often. 80% support term limits. Right. That's strong bipartisan strength for the issue. Yet even this very watered down version that the public wasn't happy with, they wouldn't even bring it to a vote. So they're really at the point of just thumbing their nose, I think, at any ethical concerns in particular. And this is the most recent in a chain of them.
So, Mark, I did a little math right before this because I served in the Illinois House, and, quite a few people have come and gone from the Illinois House. And so I just did a little tally sheet since I left office in January of 2019. 43, by my count, 43 of the 118 House reps are new, and another 17, I would say, are new within maybe looking back 6 years total. Right. So that's like 1/3 of the Illinois House that has changed over. Aren't they term limits themselves?
They are. Actually, in general, I don't like term limits for that reason. For other states and at the federal level. Now, I'm probably not going to be very popular for saying that because, again, these are popular across the nation. But Illinois, to me, is in a unique situation where we got to churn the leadership more often. This is we need change across the board, and anything that we can do to churn the people in charge, I think would help here.
Sure, because you've got special interests down there who are heavily invested in incumbents and running the show. And it took the feds coming in and wiring everyone up to move the needle against, some of the kingpins like Ed Burke and Mike Madigan and Cullerton. And so, but short of a federal investigation, I mean, that basically is term limits in Illinois is in federal indictments. Do you think? Well, and Pritzker didn't offer any, and you note this in your article, he broke his promise on fair maps. He said he wouldn't sign off on a political map, and he signed off on it. Do you think it's because voters don't care, or have they been handcuffed by Democrats when you look at those maps? They're so unfair. They ensure the majorities and minorities. They
ensure incumbency.
Yeah, ensure incumbency. It's hard... It's hard to identify, like, what's one. Everyone wants a quick fix and a solution on this. It's hard to identify one
solution, or do we need all of them?
That's right. I think it's going to take many things across the board. We've got a list of 20 or 30 reform we think need to be done. And there's no action being taken on any of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the big one, I think, is fair maps, because Pritzker was so firm and so clear. I think that was a large part of how he got a lot of votes, and just walked away from that commitment. And that's a big one. They've got such a gerrymandered map now that it's going to be very difficult to challenge the incumbents.
And also worth noting is the ballot practices that other states are challenging now have been in place in Illinois. They've been the law of the land here for a really long time. So that's another challenge. You can run great candidates and have all the laws in the world if you can cheat at the ballot box or, ballot harvest, which is they've been doing not officially but unofficially for a long time. It's just tricky.
Now, we got to admit too, the establishment here, the political establishment, has been uniquely good at learning how to play the game, and that's why it needs to be broken up.
Yes.
I mean,
the federal indictments helped.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing you can't take away from him is his intelligence, and in a diabolical Machiavellian sense, of course. But that know-how has been passed down. It's institutional. Don Harmon, now the president of the Senate, was Madigan's right-hand man for a long time. Cullerton, right? John Cullerton, excuse me. And Cullerton was equally clever.
Yeah, he seems to know the game.
One thing I would interject, they're not all bad. I mean, one guy I would give a shout out to is Tony DeLuca from Chicago Heights. He at least tried to move this watered down version of term limits. He's a Democrat, but my experience with him is that even though he doesn't agree with us probably on most things, he's at least listens, and he's a gentleman. Jeanne, you'll recall that you got Ted and I in to testify about the option of bankruptcy for Illinois municipalities. It was in his committee, and he gave us a fair, polite hearing, unlike
Anthony's a very, very good guy. I mean, honestly, but he used to be a Republican, and then the Democrats enticed him to run as a Democrat, and he's held that position ever since, and he's supported the incumbency of all those leaders all this time. But I do appreciate him. I served with him on Cities and Villages, which was actually one of the more bipartisan committees, and he, as a former mayor, he gets it too. So he on the margins, he's really, really one of the better Democrats, no doubt about it. And I just wish he were stronger and his voice was heard. I'd like to go back, though, a little bit about the political maps, because it couldn't have been more obvious. And so it makes Pritzker's lie about promising an independent map commission even bigger. And because when you read H.R. 539, it literally says in some of these parts of the bill that actually puts the electoral map together, it says this district was drawn for political purposes. It couldn't have been more obvious. It says redistricting principles, numerous political purposes were considered, including incumbent protection when drawing these maps. So, I mean, they're obvious. He's a big liar about this. And, I just, if you can draw your voters, then term limits don't really make a difference. I mean, it's one way or the other. That's what I told the Daily Herald when they asked, do you think term limits are the answer? And I said, in the absence of a fair map, then they are the answers. Then you have to have term limits.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate that the United States Supreme Court essentially punted on this issue. 2 years ago, the case went up to them, and they decided they weren't going to take this on. I don't get it. I read that opinion. I just don't understand.
Are you talking about the Wisconsin challenge?
Yes. And truth be told, Republicans do this in other states where they have power. And a lot of Republicans were kind of happy with that decision because they do control the legislatures in most states. Now, Pritzker made his promise, notwithstanding those facts, though, so he should have been held to promise. And I'd like to see it all go away. And I don't know what the solution is now that the Supreme Court has declined to do anything about it.
Well, truth be told, not just myself, but definitely former Senator Mike Connolly and a couple other colleagues signed on to an amicus brief in support of the Democrats in Wisconsin on the gerrymandering court case that they had at the Supreme Court. So some of us understand that it's just good government to have a fair map. So I just wanted to raise that little point.
Well, good for you. It's just nice to see that kind of intellectual integrity and consistency too, which we don't often see.
Do you think the media has done a decent job holding Governor Pritzker accountable for breaking his campaign promise on fair maps?
No, I was very surprised
Yeah.
that there wasn't uproar about that. That was very strange. And they don't hesitate to criticize Pritzker on some things. I think there is a bias problem, of course, generally in favor of Democrats, but be silent on this is baffling.
Well,
they, in general, support the
League
fair
of
map.
Women Voters, though, they actually led the charge for a fair map amendment to the Constitution in 2014. They led the charge. They collected signatures. It was a prominent part of their platform, and they've been silent as well.
Yeah. We among all the other crises we have, there truly is a crisis in the media, not just the bias at the national level, which is flagrant. They lie outright often, but here, because of the shrinkage in local papers and the staffing problems together with what bias we do have here. And then
sort of just general disinterest and,
Yep. And disinterest and, cynicism, and people have given, I suppose in a selfish way where I should be grateful for that, because that's part of what's driving our traffic at wire points, but it's not a healthy situation. Democracy does not function without an active press informing people.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So finishing this out and kind of, connecting the dots here, it's interesting that when you talk about term limits, like I said, about 1/3 of the legislature has really probably changed over in the last 6 years. So you've had some of this churning on the smaller level. What you don't have is you don't have the leadership churning at the top. So people have been in 15, 18, 20 years plus, 30 years in some cases, even longer. Madigan's case, it was 50 years. So you don't have that leadership churning over. And then what they did this session is the leadership put in a scam of an ethics, quote unquote, ethics bill that really did nothing and resulted in essentially the current legislative inspector general stating that her position is a paper tiger, as you remarked in your column. And she also said this last legislative session has demonstrated true ethics reform is not a priority. And certainly leadership could have made this stronger. Leadership drives the public policy debate down there. Leadership decides what bills will pass and in what form they were passed. And they absolutely failed to pass real ethics reform, even in light of all the indictments that have come about in the last 18 months.
Yeah, that one the press did do a pretty good job criticizing. It was universally criticized. I haven't seen anybody speaking up on behalf of that so-called ethics bill that was passed. It was just riddled with gimmicks and shortcuts, and it really doesn't make very much difference at all. And the reforms that could have been addressed properly and that were so easy to do. Many of most other states have them, particularly on the revolving door with the legislators becoming lobbyists. They didn't really do anything on that, and it's just inexcusable. Public is going to care is open for debate, I guess, though.
It was surprising when it was being voted on, some of the people who were defending it, however. Just sort of kind of good government policy groups and things like that had spokespeople in the news going, well, it's not perfect, but, and then turns out it actually drove out the legislative inspector general, who we all know we need.
Yeah, I think a lot of those folks are, frankly, kind of naive. They just don't fully appreciate how clever unseemly a lot of these incumbents are, and they just appreciate when they're getting duped sometimes. The BGA did, however, have a very tough article dissecting the bill and explaining why it really didn't do anything.
Yes, so we applaud them for that.
Yep.
So thank you, Mark Glennon, for coming on our show today. And thank you for all the writing that you do at Wire Points and for elevating the conversation. We certainly appreciate your work.
Thanks so much for having me.